Hello, my name is Shantae Ballard. It's a pleasure to meet you. Here is my school ID. So today we're going to um, be talking about Philip Larkin. So for this project that we had to do, my term paper for English 102, I chose Philip Larkin. To be honest with you, I'll be 100% factual. I'll be honest with you. He was not my first choice. I really wanted to do my paper on Gwendolyn Brooks. However, another classmate beat me to it. So after that, I said I was looking at different poems in the book, and I read one of Larkin's poems, and I was like, oh, I like this. I said, you know what? I don't know too much about Philip Larkin, so I think it'd be fascinating to do him and learn more about him, his style of poetry, and what he was about. So, I chose three of his poems from a actual book. He has a book that he did in 1955 called The Less Deceived. I really liked the name of the book, and it was that book that really gave him his fame in the literary world. So I was like, ooh, I'll do that. I said that'd be a good. I said, it's a book. So I said, it'd be cool. I'll do a book. But then, as I read a book, I was like, oh, it's a book of poetries, and it's 29 poems in his book. So I took three of the poems out of the book to kind of like dig deep into it. The good thing about Larkin is that he not only is he very structured with how he writes his poems, you can tell like he's a very talented writer, not by just how descriptive that he is, but different elements that he uses in his writing, his rhyme schemes and stuff like that, and you'll be, oh, okay, like this is like, oh, okay, like he's really about writing. You get that sense from him. Um, However, there are some things about his work I like, some things about his work that I didn't like. Um, and I did learn a lot about him. Some things that was very interesting. Some things that were a little bit like, ooh, but that comes with any person who's great or a genius or anything. You'll be like, oh, okay, like they're wound up being very interesting people. And Philip Larkin was one of those. Um, so three of the poems that I chose out of the 29 was I chose church going. I chose I remember, and I also chose deception. Um, Out of the 29 works, those to me stood out a lot, like a lot, especially deception, and stirred a lot of emotions into me. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is definitely going to be good to include in my paper. So the most useful biographical resource that I use in developing my essay would have to be The Greatness of Philip Larkin by Dana Giora. I found that very helpful. And the reason why I found it helpful with the biographical aspects of his life, because it told me a lot of things about him. When you're doing this, you're trying to go to articles and you really don't want to go like to Wikipedia and find out stuff. So I like this because it gave us some information. His parents, his parents' profession. Um, like I learned that his father was the treasurer for Coventry, England, where he was born in 1922. That was the area of England that he was born into, and that his father lived and was also the treasurer for. His mom was a former school teacher, and it was very interesting to find out that his father um, had a love for literature, which just makes sense. That's where Larkin probably got it from, but also that he was a Nazi sympathizer, and which I always tell people, especially when it comes to racism, it's usually passed down. Sometimes it's usually you learn it in the house, not always from outside. Um, and at the age of 8, his parents sent him to go to boarding schools, like information like that, or the fact that even though he's known for being a poet, I had no idea that he wanted to be a novelist first, but then wound up getting into poetry a little bit later. So it was a lot of good things and learning, what his friends thought about him and stuff like that. So I had a lot of great details, which really helped me do my biographical um, part of my paper. Very helpful, very resourceful. Learned a lot, college, stuff like that. It had some other very interesting personal facts in there that I learned that I did not necessarily include it in my essay, but I kind of like wanted to include it, but was trying not to be too wordy. But it was a lot of good, useful information that gave me a good understanding of his biographical background. So I really did enjoy that. Um, a lot of good information. A lot of good information. Also, fun Larkin fact is after he passed away, even though I will tell you, I do think that this part is a little messed up, that one of his friends, who was also another writer, um, pretty much leaked out letters and stuff that him and Larkin wrote to each other. And some of the letters were sexist and racist, and his friend played him out to be, be an alcoholic and into pornography and a whole bunch of other stuff, which can, probably be true. Not saying that none of the stuff is necessarily true, but not saying that it's not true. Some of it I do feel like was reflected in his work, though, especially with the sexist part. Um, so when it came to, um, like my literary critical resources, what I found to be very helpful was actually two. Mr. Larkin Gets a Life by Joseph Epstein, and a good article I found, Experience, Words, and Meaning in Philip Larkin's The Less Deceived by Esvin Ross. I may be pronouncing that wrong, but very, very, very good information, especially the experience, words, and meaning in Philip Larkin's The Less Deceived. I like that because it gave 15 different poems out of the 29 poems, and really broke down the meaning of the poem, and also talked about what critics were saying about him and stuff like that, and also what made his work good, but also controversial. So I was gonna say this really was good when I was coming to doing my literary critical resource, and like really having to dig into that and be like, let's dig into the work, let's talk about it. So I really did actually enjoy reading that. It was a lot to read. I felt like I read a lot of articles, and it's always hard when you start writing an article because you know what you're looking for, but just trying to find articles that support what you're trying to convey in your paper. Um, so that was really really good. The weakest part of my paper, hmm, hmm. So I'm not saying like I have like such a strong paper or anything like that, but as far as weaknesses of my paper, it may be grammar. I always say grammar. I do struggle along with grammar. I try to get people to look over my work and stuff like that, but I know I always get things with grammar. So some of my grammar always makes me worry about my paper. I do feel like the information I found was sound, but sometimes you always second guess on whether when you make an idea or you present an idea in your paper, whether the information backs it up and clarifies it. And sometimes I wanted to dig deep. I think one weakness I can definitely tell with my paper was trying to stay in the confine of staying I was just like stay. I'm trying to like stay in my lane, but just trying to like really follow the rules of how the paper's supposed to be structured. Like your introduction should only be this amount of words and stuff like that. And I kind of felt like I was at a disadvantage with only trying to do a 1,500 word essay. It's hard for me, especially in my writing, to sometimes limit, or sometimes I feel like I didn't convey certain things that I really wanted to put in the paper, or really wanted to say in the paper, because I was working on, I don't want to be too wordy. Like you don't want to make the person reading it lose interest. But it was like he was a very interesting character, so it's really hard not to talk about certain aspects, certain things that I learned, because to me, it really helped reflect who he was as a person and how it influenced his work. So I did struggle with trying to like keep myself not putting too much information into the paper, and I still wind up going over the 1,500 words, which I knew I was going to, because there's one part of the paper that I couldn't wait to get into, which was how I felt about the three poems that I chose, and about how I felt about Philip Larkin. So it was kind of like I had a kind of like a love hate relationship. Had a lot of respect for the work that he did. However, had a lot of opinions about how I felt about it. But then at the same time, I will say that I do think the strongest part of my paper was probably when I was able to talk about how I felt about his poems, especially the poem Deception. What? Yes. If you haven't read Deception, you may want to read that. That was kind of hard for me. It was a little challenging to me also, with me, the subject of the poem and how it kind of relates to my life. So when you're looking at the poem Deception, right? Deception is about a poem, but it's about two different. It's called Deceptions because it's about two different deception. Larkin talks about the deception that the girl received, because the girl is raped, and she was deceived by the man that raped her. That's one deception. But the second deception, which I didn't think anybody, when you first read the poem, thought that it was going to wind up being, was that Larkin at the end was going to say that, he was more deceived than the victim, because, he was deceived by his own impulses, his own desires, or his own urge, which makes it sound like he had no control over, which led him to rape that person. So he was more deceived than the victim and stuff. It's very sympathetic towards the rapist, which comes off as very sexist. And as somebody who has survived, I don't like to call myself a rape victim, but somebody who has survived rape, left very mixed emotions in me and how I felt about Philip Larkin. I had to did have to take into consideration of his upbringing, the time that he was living in, and stuff that was going on. So it wasn't uncommon to imagine him having the ideas or views and stuff that he had at that time. However, it doesn't mean that I have to like it, and I didn't. And I think that was a hurdle for me. Really picking deception, wanting to just talk about deception, and also getting frustrated. Like it'd be points where I read deception, it's like, oh, I'm not gonna do it, and it's like, okay, you should do it. And then it'd be times where I'd be like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing it, but just like sometimes, I had to take a whole week off from the paper, just because that one poem caused a lot of emotions in me that I didn't really want to relive. But it taught me a lot about myself, so I'm really glad that I did do it. And I'm glad that I was able to get over it because I was at a point that I was like, I'm not even going to do this paper. I'm not going to do the video. I don't even want to do it, but I'm glad I did it. The most interesting thing that I learned during the research project was his friend kind of betraying him as a friend. We all know our friends are flaws, but I don't think I'm going to leak their letters afterwards and kind of ruin their whole reputation that they had. They'd be like, "Oh, you think my friends are great? Oh, he's actually a butt munch." And let me tell you why. Come look at these letters. I thought that was kind of like, ooh, horrible. I found that very interesting. I also found it very interesting that Larkin really tried to live a simple life. Like he became a librarian only after he did not pass to go into the services, like work in the military. Um, for World War II after he graduated. And I guess like he was kind of like scared um, that he was gonna have to like do some other type of labor or something, or I forgot what it was said in the Greatness of Philip Larkin article, but it's really, really good how she was talking about like he kind of just fell into it. So when he was offered the job as a librarian, he was like, oh, I'll just take it, and wound up taking it, and just doing it for the rest of his life, besides, being a poet and an author. Um, so that was very interesting. Um, yes, I was gonna say I did not know that, and also that he only got a house. Like he had an apartment, and then I think he was squatting there for 18 years. And after, I guess they were gonna like you got to get off the property. He bought a house, or the only reason why he got a car because he rode his bicycle until the age of 41. The only reason why he got a car was because like people pushing him towards it, but it's not like something like he really wanted to do. So I kind of like that he really did try to live a simple life, just like he was always reflecting on this simple life pre World War One, and how life used to be as a child for him. So I think it was very interesting. Larkin was a very interesting character, and I actually really enjoyed doing it. Shockingly, because I really wanted to do Gwendolyn Brooks because her one of her poems really did change and affect my life. And I was a little discouraged, but I'm glad that I did Philip Larkin because it was something different. I did learn a lot, and it's always good to do something that you're not comfortable with and challenge yourself. So I'm really glad that y'all gave me the opportunity to do that. And yeah, I hope you enjoy my essay as much as I enjoyed writing it.